I didn't want to do it at first, and they'd been after me to do one for about 2 years. And I thought, well, there's going to be 22,000 people there, so we can throw in some new songs maybe and everything. But as it turned out, we didn't. We played all old songs, and they just sort of stared at us. And it was a strange experience, really. It was about, what was about 6.
On New Year's Eve, 1985, shocking news rippled across the world. A small, private DC-3 plane carrying rock and roll legend Ricky Nelson and his band had crashed in a Texas field after a fire broke out on board. The teen idol, the man who grew up in America's living rooms, was gone at just 45 years old. In the immediate aftermath, as everyone mourned, a much grimmer story began to take shape. News reports painted a picture of a star who'd fallen on hard times. His net worth was estimated to be around $500,000, but he was supposedly over $1 million in debt. His finances were described as a total mess, destroyed by a costly divorce and a lifestyle he just couldn't afford anymore. For his 4 children, it looked like their father had left them with nothing but a mountain of IOUs and the tarnished memory of a faded star. For years, this was the story everyone believed, the story of a tragic end made even worse by financial ruin, but that story, well, it isn't the truth. It's not even close. Hidden from the public, a different kind of storm was brewing. A secret will, produced at the last minute, was about to set the stage for a bitter family war. And buried deep within outdated recording contracts and dusty accounting ledgers lay a hidden treasure, a priceless music catalog that record companies had been systematically undervaluing for decades. Everyone thought Ricky Nelson died broke. The reality is, he left behind a fortune so vast, so staggeringly large, that the fight to control it would tear his family apart and, in the end, make his children richer than anyone could have ever imagined. This isn't just the story of how Ricky Nelson died. It's the story of how his legacy was reborn from the ashes, creating a financial empire that's still growing today. To really get why things got so messy after Ricky died, you have to understand just how strange his life was. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a national institution, born into a level of fame that's almost impossible to imagine today. His parents were Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, the stars and masterminds of the radio and television phenomenon, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Ricky and his older brother, David, weren't just cast in a show about a perfect American family, they were that family. From the time he was 8, Ricky's childhood was basically a script. His home was a set. Family vacations became storylines, and private moments were rehearsed before being broadcast to the entire country. By the time he was a teenager, he was one of the most recognizable faces in America, the clean-cut, handsome son of the nation's favorite parents, but underneath that polished surface, something else was simmering. Ricky was falling in love with the raw, rebellious sound of rock and roll, the music of Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, and Fats Domino. It was a sound that was the total opposite of the wholesome, safe world his family's show portrayed. In a move nobody saw coming, he famously told his girlfriend in 1957 that he was going to record a song just to impress her. What started as a teenage boast turned into a cultural explosion. He recorded a cover of Fats Domino's "I'm Walkin'" and then performed it on the TV show. America watched as their polite, scripted son transformed into a genuine rock and roll star right before their eyes. The song was a smash hit, and it launched one of the most successful music careers of the era. For the next few years, Ricky Nelson lived a double life. On TV, he was the charming boy next door, but on the radio, he was a chart-topping rock idol with a string of massive hits like "Poor Little Fool," "Travelin' Man," and "Hello Mary Lou." He landed 54 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 between 1957 and 1973. At just 18, he was already in the 93% income tax bracket, earning a fortune that made a normal life, or even going to college, seem completely absurd. In 1963, he signed a 20-year contract with Decca Records, which seemed to secure his future for decades. His personal life was just as public. In 1963, he married Kristen Harmon, the daughter of football legend Tom Harmon and the sister of future actor Mark Harmon. Theirs was seen as a Hollywood royal wedding, a perfect match between two entertainment dynasties. They went on to have 4 children: Tracy, born in 1963, identical twins Gunnar and Matthew, born in 1967, and their youngest, Sam, born in 1974. To the outside world, Ricky Nelson had it all: a television kingdom, a rock and roll empire, and a beautiful, growing family. But the pressure of growing up in public, combined with the excesses of the rock and roll lifestyle, was starting to crack that perfect facade. By the late 1970s, the picture-perfect image of Ricky Nelson's life was shattering. His marriage to Kristen Harmon, once a storybook romance, crumbled into a bitter and very public war. The divorce dragged on for years, becoming front-page tabloid news. Both sides threw around accusations of drug use and infidelity. Financially, it was a catastrophe. The divorce alone ended up costing over $1 million in legal fees, a huge sum at the time, and Ricky had to pay for both his and Kristen's lawyers. This was the start of the financial bleeding that would later define the public's memory of his final years. His career had also hit a rough patch. While he toured relentlessly, the chart-topping hits of the 50s and 60s were long gone. He did have a brief, brilliant comeback in 1972 with the song "Garden Party," a defiant anthem he wrote after being booed at a Madison Square Garden concert for playing new music instead of his old hits. The song was a top 10 hit and became his personal motto: "You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself." But it was just a temporary return to the top. For most of the next decade, he was a road warrior, playing clubs, fairs, and oldie circuits just to pay the bills and keep up an expensive lifestyle. This lifestyle included one particularly costly toy: a vintage DC-3 airplane. The plane had a history of mechanical problems and was expensive to maintain, but it was essential for his constant touring. It was this very plane that would become the site of his tragic end. On December 31, 1985, while flying from Alabama to a New Year's Eve show in Dallas, a fire broke out in the cabin. The pilots tried to make an emergency landing, but it was too late. The plane crashed near DeKalb, Texas, killing Ricky, his fiancée Helen Blair, and 5 members of his band. The news was devastating. But as the shock wore off, the story quickly turned from tragedy to financial ruin. Rumors swirled that Nelson's net worth was only about $500,000, while his debts had soared to over $1 million. His friends and his twin sons, Gunnar and Matthew, would later confirm that their father's estate was deep in the red. The messy divorce was a huge part of it, but there were also ongoing tax issues and other debts. It really seemed like one of the biggest stars of his generation had died broke, leaving his 4 children nothing but a legacy of debt. The story was simple, sad, and everyone accepted it as the final, tragic chapter of his life. In the weeks after the crash, the situation looked grim. At first, everyone believed Ricky had died intestate, meaning without a will. This created a legal mess, and his ex-wife, Kristen Harmon, quickly tried to take control of his estate, even though they were divorced. She also filed a claim for a piece of his life insurance. For a moment, it looked like whatever little inheritance might be left after paying off the debts was about to be snatched away from the children. Then came the first bombshell. Ricky's brother, David Nelson, came forward with a formal will. It was dated August 22, 1985, just 4 months before the crash. And this will drew some crystal-clear battle lines. It named David as the executor of the estate and left everything Ricky owned directly to his 4 children, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam. In it, Ricky had specifically and deliberately cut out Kristen, stating he was making no provisions for his ex-wife. He also made no provision for his fiancée, Helen Blair, who died with him, noting that was what they had mutually wanted. Kristen Harmon didn't take this lying down. She launched a fierce legal battle, challenging the will and David's role as executor. The fight got nasty, dragging up the same painful accusations from their divorce. Allegations of drug use and bad parenting were thrown back and forth in court, creating a public spectacle and deepening the family's wounds. As if that wasn't enough, other claimants started coming out of the woodwork, all wanting a piece of the debt-ridden estate. The family of Helen Blair, Ricky's fiancée, filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which was eventually settled for a small sum. Then came another, even more personal blow. A woman named George Ann Crew claimed that her son, Eric Jude Crew, was Ricky's biological child from an affair. A court-ordered blood test had actually confirmed this years earlier, in 1981. Ricky had been ordered to pay child support, though reports suggest he stopped paying after a while. But despite the proof of paternity, Ricky's will was merciless. It contained a clause that specifically disinherited Eric Crew, stating his paternity was disputed. After Ricky's death, George Ann Crew fought for her son's right to a share of the estate, but because of the will's explicit wording, her legal challenges failed. Eric, Ricky Nelson's fifth child, was left with nothing. The estate was under attack from all sides. There was a war with the ex-wife, wrongful death lawsuits, creditors lining up, and a paternity dispute. With over $1 million in debt and legal fees piling up, it seemed like there would be nothing left to fight over. The story of the broke, tragic rock star seemed more true than ever. But what none of them knew, not the lawyers, not the press, not even the family, was that the real fortune wasn't in a bank account. It was hidden in plain sight, in the grooves of his vinyl records. While the family was fighting over what they thought were scraps, the real value of Ricky Nelson's estate was lying dormant and completely underestimated. That value was his music catalog, the rights to his classic recordings and the future royalties they would generate. Back in 1985, the music industry was a different world. Nobody really understood the financial power of an older artist's back catalog. Streaming and digital downloads, the things that would later turn these catalogs into gold mines, were still science fiction. Record companies based their accounting on physical sales of records and CDs, using strange and often predatory formulas that had been around for decades. Ricky's original recording contract, which he signed with Imperial Records in 1957, was a product of its time. It gave him an incredibly low royalty rate, about 5% of 90% of records sold. A standard practice when artists' rights weren't a top priority. When Imperial was later bought by Capitol Records, that outdated contract came with it. For years after his death, the estate, managed first by his brother David and later by the children, got small royalty checks from Capitol Records. The amount seemed to fit the narrative that Ricky was a nostalgia act whose glory days were over. But as the years passed and the digital music revolution started, the Nelson children began to question the numbers. They saw their father's music in movies, on TV, and popping up on new platforms like iTunes, but the royalty statements from Capitol just didn't seem to add up. They ordered an audit, and what they found was shocking. The audit revealed that Capitol Records was allegedly using accounting methods that were decades out of date. For instance, they were charging breakage fees on digital downloads. This was a fee originally meant to cover the cost of physical records breaking during shipping, a charge that makes absolutely no sense for a digital file. The auditors also found that Capitol was possibly ignoring a royalty increase promised to legacy artists like Nelson back in 1992, which should have doubled his rate on many sales and given the estate a 50% share of licensing income. But the most incredible discovery was something Capitol called the unmatched income, cash. According to the estate's investigation, Capitol Records was sitting on a massive slush fund, estimated to be between $100 million and $250 million, of income that the label claimed it couldn't connect to any specific artist. The Nelson estate believed a big chunk of this money belonged to them and other legacy artists, and that Capitol had deliberately made it hard for anyone to prove it. Armed with this bombshell, Ricky Nelson's heirs decided to fight back. In October 2011, nearly 26 years after his death, the Rick Nelson Company LLC filed a massive lawsuit against Capitol Records. They didn't just accuse the label of bad accounting, they accused it of a systematic, decades-long scheme to steal royalties from the very artists who built the company. The lawsuit demanded back pay, but it also sought to redefine his old contract for the modern era, arguing that a digital download wasn't a sale, but a license, which should give them a much higher 50% royalty rate. The battle was no longer about settling debts, it was about reclaiming a fortune. The story of Ricky Nelson's hidden fortune is a powerful reminder that the legacies of our favorite artists are often way more complicated than we know. So many musicians from that era have had to fight similar battles to get what they're owed. Have you ever wondered if your favorite classic artists are really being paid fairly in the age of streaming? Let us know in the comments which artist's legacy you think deserves a closer look. And if you're finding this story as incredible as we are, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss how this high-stakes legal war ends. The lawsuit against Capitol Records was a true David versus Goliath fight. On one side, you had the estate of a deceased star, armed with audit reports and a burning sense of injustice. On the other, a massive multinational music company with an army of expensive lawyers. Capitol fought back hard, arguing their accounting was perfectly fine and that the terms of Nelson's 1950s contract were still binding, no matter the technology. They claimed a digital download was just a modern record, so the old royalty rates should apply. The whole music industry was watching this case. It was about more than just Ricky Nelson, it was a landmark case that could change the game for any musician whose contract was signed before the internet. If the Nelson estate won, it could open the floodgates for countless other older artists to sue their labels for a bigger piece of the digital pie. For nearly 3 years, the legal battle raged on. Lawyers filed mountains of paperwork and argued over complex contract law. The Nelson heirs, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam, were now adults, all united in this crucial fight for their father's legacy and their own futures. The twins, Gunnar and Matthew, who had their own taste of rock stardom in the early 90s with their band, Nelson, were especially vocal. They had seen the ugly side of the music industry firsthand and were determined to get justice for their dad. They had lived with the public story of their father dying in debt, and now they were on the verge of rewriting that history forever. Then, in April of 2014, just as the case was about to head to a potentially explosive public trial, there was a breakthrough. A settlement was reached. As is common in these kinds of lawsuits, the terms were kept strictly confidential. The exact amount Capitol Records paid the Nelson estate has never been made public. But there was no doubt who won. In a public statement, the estate's lawyer announced that all issues had been amicably resolved. The case was dismissed. While the numbers were secret, the implications were huge. Music industry insiders agreed that for Capitol to settle, the payout must have been massive, likely running into many millions of dollars to cover decades of underpayment. More importantly, the settlement reportedly gave the family what they'd been fighting for all along: transparent accounting and a new, much higher royalty rate on all of their father's music, including digital downloads and streams. They hadn't just won a financial windfall from the past, they had unlocked the full earning potential of their father's music for the future. The hidden treasure was finally theirs. The story of Ricky Nelson, the broke and indebted star, was officially dead. In its place was a new reality. Ricky Nelson, the man who left his children a powerful, money-making machine that would make them wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. The 2014 settlement with Capitol Records changed everything. It transformed the Ricky Nelson estate from a debt-ridden cautionary tale into a thriving, valuable enterprise. The 4 Nelson children, who were once told they had inherited nothing, were now the beneficiaries of a massive fortune. The settlement money, combined with the new, much higher royalty stream, gave them all incredible financial security. Today, Ricky Nelson's music is bigger than ever. His songs are streamed millions of times, licensed for movies and commercials, and re-released in new collections, generating a steady and substantial income for his heirs. The once undervalued music catalog is now finally recognized for what it always was, a priceless cultural treasure. His children have all carved out their own lives, forever shaped by their father's complicated legacy. Tracy Nelson became a successful actress, known for her roles in shows like Father Dowling Mysteries, and has become a courageous advocate for cancer research after surviving 3 different cancer diagnoses. Gunnar and Matthew Nelson, after their huge success with their band Nelson, continue to tour and record. They also perform tribute concerts called Ricky Nelson Remembered, where they play their father's greatest hits and share personal stories about the man they knew. Sam Hilliard Nelson, the youngest, has also followed a path in music, forming a band and working in the music business, honoring his father's legacy in his own way. The story of Ricky Nelson's estate is an incredible journey from public ruin to private riches. It's a testament to the enduring power of his music and the sheer determination of his children to fight for the truth. For years, the world only saw the tragic end of a teen idol who crashed and burned. But behind the headlines of debt and disaster was a secret story of a hidden will, a family war, and a legal battle that rewrote history. Ricky Nelson didn't leave his family a legacy of debt. He left them a garden party that never has to end.